I said, it shouldn't take more than a few months, 6 months at max. And here I am, it'll be 12 years in February. So it's, I was completely wrong about that time estimate. But it turned out to be a lot more complex than I thought it would be. Nonetheless, so I took it out and began the process of finding out about it, about its physiology. And that was a long, complicated, convoluted process. Well, let's start with looking at the front view. Now, these are the real ones. These are copies. These are stereolithographic copies, what you see up here and what you will hold. They're exact copies, I mean exact, as close as science can get them, same weight, same everything. But this is the real deal here. Now, if you notice, the differences are, and I can show you here with this, a normal human eye socket, see that? It's 2 inches, 2 knuckles deep, to go back to the foramens and back. With a star child, you can see that it doesn't even go quite 1. It's very much shallower. So you have a real difference there. If you look at the brow ridges, all humans, all primates have varying degrees of brow ridges. You see those, you feel your own, everybody's got them. And then every human nose comes down, no matter how big your honker, it's going to have a little dip up here between the brow ridge and the beginning of the nose. Star Child has neither of those. It has no brow ridges, as you can see. I mean, you look at it, absolutely flat, and you see that its nose has no dip at all. It goes straight down. You'll be able to see it when you come up closer. But anyway, take my word for it. A complete difference there. There are no sinuses under here, as you will see in another slide. So we're already into some really significant differences. Now this is the size of it. It's a little smaller. As you see, it's a little smaller than a normal human head. All of us in here, we would have, it's about the size of maybe his head, approximately. I put Jaden Smith up here, 12-year-old actor in The Karate Kid, Will Smith's son. That's about the size. A 5-foot adult or about average 12-year-old. Now, this is the copy with the jaw that I showed you. And you can see that if it had eyeballs like we have, they would be bulging out like frog eyes. So it would have had a problem growing up in any kind of an atmosphere where there are other children with eyes like that, and we assume it had eyes because they're absolutely perfect in their design, and if you put your fingers in, you can feel ridges and dips exactly the same in both of them, so it's not a deformity. Its genes told it to grow in all of these different ways, and that's important. The fact that its genes told it to grow different in 25 major areas, which we'll see. It make sure that it's not, we think, entirely human. Now, here's another comparison. You see this line across where the nose bones connect into the brow, and you've got that piece right there. So we line those two up, excuse me, and this is what we get, and we can see the differences already. They're very dramatic. This goes from back here at the back end of the depth of the 2-inch cone that makes up a human eye socket. It's shoved down and inward toward the nose. So if the eyes are centered like ours, they're going to be here, and it's going to have a real big upper lid if they have eyes, and if it's got eyes like ours, of course, they'll be sitting out, so the lids will have to come over. It'll be a pretty long throw to do that. We think it had eyes. It's got all the little points of attachment for muscles, but they couldn't really be like our eyes. But we don't know what eyes they had. There was a time when we thought, well, maybe it has kind of like bug eyes or something, where they take in a full 180 field of vision without moving. And the idea of the big black alien eyes, well, maybe that's what it is. Maybe they're all iris and they just see it all without moving. Possibility, but not sure about that. Okay, this is a profile view, and we begin to see some of the differences. Now, these are just the parts of a normal frontal bone, the parietals, the sphenoid, the temporal, and then the sutures, coronal sutures, like that. And we see that in the star child, and we see that the human found with it, which we know was an adult female. She had a concussion at some point that healed up right there. That's what that is. But we see, again, the brow ridge and the dip, and we see the lack of brow ridge and the no dip. So very different design there. The pieces, the parts are here, but they're in a different configuration. And obviously the ear hole is much lower, the mastoid bone much lower. This here, the pterygoid plate, I always have to mention that because everybody sees it and they say, what are those things sticking out like that? The pterygoid plate is just a bracing bone. You see how it braces up against this? If you take a real hard shot in the grill, boom! If you don't have those bones there protecting you, it'll jam right back in, go right into your brainstem and kill you. It's just a protective measure. Nature's wonderful in its design, it really is. Here we see the rear view, and this, oh, I'm sorry, let me go back because it's important to say one thing. See the inion, this knot here, this is important to mention. Feel, everybody do this. Reach around the back of your head and feel this knot that we all have back here. That is where our neck connects to our head. All primates have that. If you've got a head sitting on a neck, whatever the angle, whether you're a quadruped, biped, whatever, you have that where your neck is connecting in with a couple of really big muscles. The star child does not have that. And not only does it not have that, it has a dent. You can see it very clearly and you can feel it. It's got an actual dent instead of the bump that it should have. A very significant difference. And as you see, it's missing. That's where it is, right there. Now this is the occipital bone of a human, normal human, and this is its inion. This is the bump that you ought to have, and these are the fossa with the big muscle attachment points you see right there. Very normal, parietal, occipital. You see the star child's has been just like stretched upward in a completely different design, and you have this crease. You see the rounding of the crown, we all have that, but the star child doesn't. It has a noticeable, distinctive crease. You can't miss it. You can't miss it. And that's, again, a different genetic code, a different set of genetic instructions coming in to make it grow that way. Here we have a top view, and we see that the frontal bone, this is tilted a little bit, so, but you still see that the frontal area is a little smaller than normal, and the parietals are much bigger. And I always mention as a sidelight that Einstein had a little bit bigger parietals than the rest of us. And he was Einstein, so it can happen. Sagittal suture, this one, the red one, and coronal suture. All right? This is the underside view, as you see, and we see the missing zygomatic arch, cheekbone. And what happens here is your chewing muscles come up through your cheekbones, and they fan out against the side of your head to connect your jaw, and so you can chew and do all the things that you do. When you die and you become a skeleton, that's why both of the lower jaws are gone. It falls loose. It's not really attached to the skull. The lower jaw is not. All right, so you see that the star child is missing both of its zygomatic arches, and they go from these stobs here to there. Boom, boom. And they don't swing out as wide because, as you see, the throw, the angle is much less. It's a much tighter, much thinner face, and that indicates, again, that it had a much smaller face. This part is important right here, the basilar part, because it helps tell us that this female was at least over the age of 25, and more like, because of the wear on her teeth, she was 35 to 45 when she died, according to people who know how to judge these things. We do not know how old the star child was when it died. We thought it was a child initially, but then later, as you will see, we found out that it wasn't. But nonetheless, this bone right here is called the basilar part, and it is the last bone in the skull to fuse. It fuses between the ages of 20 and 25. Everything else is fused but that. So that would be an indication that the star child died before the age of 25, or because that's not a very good fusion point, it could have been knocked out along, if enough force hit it to knock all this off, that could have gone with it. So it doesn't really imply an age, and we can't say. This is the neck this is where a normal human neck rests, through this area right here. And we see the difference in the star child. It's a very much compressed and ovalized to about half the size of a normal human neck. A very different neck and in a very different position, as we'll see later. This is where the connection points are, the fossa for the star child, because it's not up here at the inion. The muscles connecting the neck should go up through here, as they do with the human, as you see. All this area, and you see with the star child is that much smaller. Again, very small neck. These are the zygomatic arches, cheekbones, and you see the small difference in the star child. Very much tighter, narrower face, as I said. Balance points of the craniums. Now this is interesting and important to understand. A human being is balanced well back of center, of the center point. It's like a fat kid and a skinny kid on a seesaw. And the skinny kid is the cause because we're hollow up here. We have big frontal sinuses in here. We have those big deep eye sockets that you saw taking up a lot of room. We have our nasal passages. We have our mouths. So from here forward, there's a lot of empty space. And all this is just solid bone and brain back here. So the balance point has to be back from center for us to comfortably hold our heads upright on our spines and on our necks. That's okay? You need a break here?
No.
Now, with the star child, it's dead center. It's absolutely the foramen magnum, the opening where the spine comes in, has been shifted forward underneath by about 1.5 inches. Very noticeable. And with the extension back here of the parietals and the lack of sinuses, eye sockets, and very little in the way of nose and mouth, as we'll see later, the balance point has to go forward. And look, lo and behold, nature somehow figured that out and gave it perfect balance point front and back, and side to side. Isn't that remarkable? If you're going to get a deformity, as science says this has to be, as you will see later, science answers everything we say about the star child by just saying it has to be a deformity because there's no such thing as aliens. And so if it's going to be a deformity, how would the deformity know to do all these things different and yet make it all mix perfectly? Now, this is really interesting. When I took it finally to a brain specialist who would talk to me, and understand, when I would take this out to specialists, it was I would get maybe 1 or 2 out of 10 that would even talk to me and tell me anything. And most of them would say, okay, well, I'll tell you what I know, but you can't use my name. Very few would let me use their names because there is an absolute restriction among mainstream science for having anything to do with certain forbidden subjects like UFOs, like aliens, like Bigfoot, like hominoids in general. Anything like that is verboten, and they have to think long and hard before they'll even talk about it, even in private, even with a guarantee that you won't reveal their name. They're still afraid to do even that much. That's how vicious are, the people